the actual MWA Facebook page to see when we show up, and because it usually doesn't take very long, and we're on right now.
Great.
So welcome everybody. This is Glenda Carroll, and I'm here today, as always, for MWA Northern California chapter. And this is Facebook Saturday Live. This is a place where authors, and there really are local authors, give us short, very precise presentations on the craft of crime. Well, today we're talking about sex and writing sex scenes. And I'm in book 4 of my Tricia Carson series. And I've decided now is the time for my protagonist and her boyfriend to get together, or at least to get together on the page. And I'm stuck. So I am so glad that Claire is here to do this for us. If you have any questions, drop them in the comment section on Facebook and we'll get to them once she finishes her presentation. Okay, so with that, let's see, looks like I froze. I hope we're still here. With that, let's go. And Claire, it's all up to you.
Hey, everybody. I'm Claire Johnson. I'm president of MWA NorCal, and I'm here to talk about sex and writing sex, maybe writing sex. I'm not here to talk about sex. Anyway, so I've labeled this presentation Hot Bodies, Cool Prose, Writing Sex Scenes. So the first rule is know your audience. Readers are picky about 4 things: politics sneaking into crime fiction. Check out the reviews on Amazon for any of Michael Connelly's novels, and you will see that storyline means nothing to those viewers who are pro-Trump supporters. He gets dinged for introducing politics into his novel, and he's not the only one. Violence. If your graphic novel contains graphic violent scenes, then it's not going to be everyone's cup of tea. Foul language or swearing. This seemingly innocuous detail can throw a particular type of reader out of a book. No lie, I was dinged for this in my books, which contained very little violence or sex because I had my character swear. Sex, plain and simple. It makes some readers' world go round and makes other readers head for the asexual hills. Number 1 piece of advice: fit your sexual descriptions to your book. If you're writing a cozy, do not include graphic sex scenes. Your readers will not appreciate it. It's all about tone and what you're trying to achieve overall. Sex scenes are nothing more than one tool in your arsenal of tools for creating voice, pacing, and plot. To be graphic or not to be graphic. This is, again, directly related to your audience. Rom-coms with a mystery element are going to beg for fairly detailed sex scenes, a minimum of 2. Mysteries with a rom-com element can get away with being a lot less graphic, but still there is the expectation that something will happen between the 2 romantic interests. Crime fiction that is more on the hard-boiled side can be more graphic, but in my opinion, tension is introduced to the novel through violence and not sex much. Crime fiction that is making a subtle but important political point will often have graphic sex scenes, precisely to show that, yes, same-sex or interracial couples or those couples with disabilities can have sex, so leave your Victorian prejudices at the door. If you choose graphic, novels that include graphic rape scenes, etc., don't interest me much. However, serial killer novels often have numerous scenes torturing women while subjecting them to horrific abuse. I consider this flat out violence and not sexual in the least. Write it, but I won't read it. However, graphic sex scenes can also be written so that it's not purely exploitative, but it takes a deft hand, and frankly, only so many of these scenes can exist in a novel before they start to become boring and repetitive and just gross. And more importantly, copious sex scenes start interfering with the plot and character arcs, where the focus of the novel becomes sex and not the character or the plot. Okay, so unless sex scenes move the novel forward in some way, either in terms of plot or character arcs, less is more, in my opinion, because you might lose a reader because of a graphic sex scene, and you might need to be mindful of why you are writing these scenes and what it is doing for your plot and character arcs. A reader might be willing to keep reading if they don't like sex scenes, if your bigger story is compelling. Case in point, the novel that won the Edgar this year, 5 Decembers. I can't recommend this novel more highly. It's an unbelievable book. Opens with a graphic beyond belief death scene, murder scene. Normally, I'd have thrown this book aside because violence isn't my jam, but the writing was so good that I elided over the violence. That's what you want, a strong story that will keep a reader hooked so that they are willing to overlook their natural preferences. Never discount the effect of sex interruptus or even non-sex. That can also rise the tension. You think something is going to happen and it doesn't happen. So what role can sex play in a novel? Sex adds tension, plain and simple. When you combine sex and tension, you get boom. When you hit a slow patch, a sex scene can carry a novel to the next plot arc fairly seamlessly, even if it's masquerading as a character arc. Conversely, a sex scene can heighten an even more tension-laden situation already at high alert. Add a sex scene to introduce a double whammy. So here's an example. I wrote this up the other day. When the masked man scrambled to find the gun, we scaled the fence and ran through the backyard as if our hair were on fire. 2 blocks from my house, the growl of his vintage Mustang and the high screech of the tires on the tarmac shattered the cool silence as he rounded every corner at what must have been breakneck speed. The sounds got closer and closer. Raphael yanked on my arm to stop me from running, and the force of his arm spun me around. I saw the glow of the car's headlights from around the corner. We had just enough time to roll under the first car we saw. I butted up against Raphael. We curled our bodies together so that there wasn't half an inch between us, hoping the dark of the night would make us invisible. The car kept circling the neighborhood, the shine of his headlights and the snarl of the engine passing us again and again, trying to cut us off from all avenues of escape. We lay there for over an hour, scrunched together, our bodies nearly one. As the rumble of the car engine began to recede, the hunt moving farther and farther afield, Raphael began to shake, tiny, almost imperceptible movements, and then he began to move away from me. I shoved my ass against the front of him because we needed to stay as far under the car as we could. And what was he thinking? That's when I began to shake too. A small kiss to the back of my neck had me covering my mouth, the flat of my hand hard against my lips. Carly, he said against my ear, and the perfume I'd sprayed myself with earlier in the night filled the undercarriage of the car as the sweat began pooling in the curve of my elbows, the valley between my breasts and the small of my back. We can't, I whispered back, but didn't pull away. A hand cut my breast and he said, I just want to hold you. We stayed under that car until dawn. Then the neighborhood began to wake up. So nothing really happens, but tension with the threat of the car finding them. So beyond hot and bothered, the role of sex scenes. Sex scenes, as I've said earlier, should have a function. Unless you are writing porn, soft or hard, there should be a reason for that sex scene. On a basic level, they should say something about the characters and their dynamic within a relationship. Say you have a character that is casual about their sexual encounters. What happens when a pairing occurs when one key character feels anything but casual? A sex scene can make or break the trajectory of a plot or character arc, taking your novel in a completely different direction. Think of On Chisel Beach by Ian McEwan, which is possibly the saddest and most awkward sex scene ever written. I squirmed as I read it. Or if we go highbrow, we have A Simple Kiss Between Romeo and Juliet, or at least in the movie versions, and which destroys their lives and those around them. Sex scenes can to introduce a comic element. Don't discount this. Comedy is another form of introducing tension, possibly the best form of introducing tension, because what a relief when you stop laughing, yes? Okay, so I have another example. I wrote this up. Robert couldn't understand how two men could have 10 elbows and 5 knees between them. If they exited this encounter without black eyes, he would be amazed. Look, he said, don't move. Just stay there. I have a strange fetish for sight, and the way we are going, one of us is going to lose an eye, and with my luck, it's going to be me. Theo lay back against the pillow, his black hair almost obscene against the white of the pillowcase. Robert sucked on his forefinger and then traced Theo's collarbone in one direction and then back again. Theo sighed with pleasure as Robert rubbed Theo's right earlobe between his thumb and forefinger. Did anyone ever tell you you have ears like some demented leprechaun? Sex as betrayal. This is the most powerful use of sex in a novel, in my opinion. We are at our most vulnerable when performing sex acts, both emotionally, usually, and physically. Usually, a character having sex with another character implies a level of trust. Point of view has us, the reader, identify with a character. If character A has sex with character B, for whatever reason, it's a type of capitulation, a letting down of walls on some level. This also happens to the reader. Both of these characters, and now you, know something about the other person that the rest of the world at large doesn't know. Say a woman is shy about the size of her breasts and tries to hide them with her forearms. Or a man has no chest hair and he tries to hide that fact by keeping his t-shirt on. So when character A is betrayed by character B, it's a double betrayal. It is a betrayal of character A, but it's also a betrayal of the reader. Not only did I screw you to make you think I was guilty, but never in a million years would I have sex with someone like you voluntarily. Ouch. So keep it simple and real, make it count. Don't just put a sex scene in a novel for the sake of introducing a sex scene. Make it part of a character arc at a minimum, or a plot arc if possible. Sex scenes are used to illustrate a character's vulnerabilities, biases, prejudices, anything like that. And just like violence, think about sex scenes, using sex scenes sparingly and effectively. One really well-written sex scene is worth 10 mediocre repetitive sex scenes. If you're writing a rom-com that isn't Harlan-esque in intent, then pages of sex scenes is obligatory, and we're talking about a different animal. Make sex fit the characters. If you have a character who is shy and ill at ease, and then don't make him or her into Fabio in a sex scene unless you write it so that such a character about face makes sense. Okay, don't go overboard on the details. Trust me on this one. It gets boring after a couple of pages. And again, we're not talking about romance novels. And the reason for the sex scene will get lost. You must have a reason for a sex scene. And if you can't articulate it, then you're in trouble. You're looking for physical action that reflects the character. Someone who has little sexual experience might be tentative, unsure of themselves. Their touch might be tentative. They might be hesitant about making the first move, shocked by the depth of their desire, cautious, maybe too cautious. They unbutton one button of their blouse, but they're hesitant about going to the second one, or maybe they rebutton it. I mean, this can be very, very effective. They might even try to ignore their desire. Someone who has lots of sexual experience might be unnerved by someone who is innocent. So use this to your advantage. So what goes around comes around. The key factor in writing sex scenes is to know your audience, right? Because many of us are looking at self-publishing or are currently self-publishing. You do not want to market your cozy novel to readers who are uncomfortable with graphic sex scenes. You will lose readers and they will not come back. And for cozy writers, holding hands, a head resting on someone's shoulder, or an embrace at the right moment might be enough. Conversely, crime fiction demands a little more oomph because this world is grittier. Sex isn't taboo, it's what people do. That doesn't mean it doesn't have repercussions. And in fact, it should have repercussions. A graphic sex scene won't throw the readers out of this type of book. And in fact, it might set the stage for murder, which is, of course, what we all want on the page, obviously. So when in doubt, analyze a popular novel written in your subgenre and evaluate how graphic the sex is. Chart when it occurs. Is it toward the end of the novel for a big payback, or how it occurs, lots of details or little details, and determine what role sex plays in this book. Does it create a bond between the main characters, or does it function as both a character and a plot arc? This novel already has readers that have bought into the author's decisions regarding sex scenes. Use this as a guide. So that's basically it. Just be mindful of your audience. That's the key advice I have. Think about who you want to read, who you're trying to reach. Sex can make someone turn a page to get to the next page, but it can also make someone throw a book down if that is not what they're looking for. So you really need to think about your audience. I mean, I think a lot of these caveats also apply to violence, but like I said, a really well-written book, you can skip over the super violent scenes, just like you can skip over a sex scene that is too graphic for you if the writing is compelling enough. So that's it, Glenda. I don't have any more advice.
Okay. I have a couple questions. One is, you just mentioned analyzing a book, popular book, finding out, where the sex scene is. And I wondered if you can go into that a little bit more. Is there a book you have in mind that maybe you've analyzed and looked at, okay, the sex scene is here, it means XYZ, or the sex scene is there? I'm just curious how you do that.
I actually don't have a book I can sort of pick out of my brain. I think, in 5 Decembers, the protagonist has 2 love interests, and they're both fade to black sex scenes, even though the violence in this book is really graphic. But the sex scenes are both fade to black, and in both cases, it says something very profound later on about both of these characters. One is like, you can't turn the clock back, and the second one is about betrayal. And can the main protagonist, the detective, can he somehow come back from that betrayal and, I don't want to say satisfy the woman he loves, but prove to her that he is remorseful about this betrayal. And so one is the sex scene that happens, but you can't turn back the clock. And the second one is about redemption. So these are much bigger issues. And there, you don't really see any sex, although you see desire, you see love, and they're both very, very profound, and they both kind of make the novel. I mean, the interesting thing about this book, 5 Decembers, is that it breaks all the rules. You have a mystery that kind of ends up fading out. You have the storyline at the bombing of Pearl Harbor going in a completely different direction. We have no idea what this author is doing. And then you have everything sort of come full circle, and you would think that you would lose interest in the novel because, it takes away from the murder, but you don't at all. It's a riveting book. And these sex scenes are especially the last scenes in the novel, it's about redemption. It's about betrayal and then redeeming himself. And, very, very moving. And yet these are sex scenes. So that's the book that I would choose to make it so much bigger than body parts, basically, because we don't really have body parts here, but we have desire, we have love, and of course, we ultimately have sex. So, I mean, that's a great example.
Yeah, there's 2 things. I guess this is a question. When you're writing a sex scene, can that become boring to both you and the reader if you're doing it sort of over and over and over?
Yeah,
If there's too much of it.
It can, yes, it can. I certainly get bored when I'm reading, say I'm reading, a rom-com, a popular rom-com, a book that gets 4.5 stars, 5 stars on Amazon, right? If I'm reading that kind of book, and I can tell at a certain point where we're going to have 5 or 6 graphic sex scenes. And part of it is because the characters tend to be one-dimensional. And I don't mean this as a criticism. And if you read this kind of book, then that's what you're looking for. But the guys are always ripped. They always look fantastic when you take off their shirts. I don't know about a lot of people, but I look okay when I take off my shirt, but I don't look fantastic. And the women are if the women are sort of they're always sort of the ugly duckling that turns into the swan. And those kind of tropes work in that kind of book because that's what the readers are looking for. But if by the time you get to sex scene number 4, it's just like, okay, we're done with this. We know exactly that he's ripped. Oh, look, he's ripped. Oh, look, he has, legs like tree trunks. Oh, and, he has, an ass that you can look at forever. It just ends up being, it has to be repetitive because we only have so many body parts. And, you can make it interesting. You can introduce a little BDSM in there if that's your jam. But basically, sex is fairly clinical in how parts move together and how they work. So that's why I personally like books where sex is in some ways it's a spotlight onto a character, and it's even better if it's a plot arc. And that is exactly what happens in 5 Decembers. These are both play into the plot quite nicely, and also say a tremendous amount about the protagonist and then these minor protagonists. So it can't get boring, and really there is only so many ways to write a sex scene, and then it just is, you kind of can, it becomes almost Mad Libs, you can fill in the blank, basically, in my opinion.
Yeah, I've got a question from Lori King. She says, let's see, any thoughts about writing sex in a form you're not personally familiar with, i.e. a gay sex for a heterosexual and vice versa, kinky sex, if it goes with your character, but not for your personality. So yeah, it's how do you write about kind of sex that you're not personally involved with?
Well, I have written male sex scenes, and I took my cues from, there are actually gay men who out there who tell women how to write male sex scenes that, women seem, because I think it's fairly obvious, but women seem to be, assume that, all gay men have anal sex. Apparently this is not true. This gay man emailed me and said, no, this isn't true. We, some men don't like anal sex and some do. And, this isn't a given. And so I think that I read actually a lot because, I don't really care what sex the protagonists are. I read some, lots of actually male mysteries. And in fact, our MWA EVP, Greg Herron, has a number of books out about, with his gay male protagonist. And so I would tend to say, if you really want to go in that direction, and so that it doesn't become fetish, more of a fetish, and women writing gay men tend to do that. They tend to make them into male Barbie dolls. So, I would read authors, who are gay, and even a wonderful book, absolutely great book. Vera Kelly Is Not Here. I think that's it. And fabulous book. And there's 3 in this series. I need to read the 3rd one. And her main character is a lesbian in the 60s. So I don't know if the author is a lesbian, but these books are really nicely written, and the nuance. And of course, in the 60s, people were getting arrested for having, gay bars were being raided, and, a very, very scary time. So people were very secretive about their sexuality. So I would read novels that, where you can, you have gay or hetero people writing about sex. I mean, I do think that it becomes difficult with heterosex because, I mean, talk about fetishizing it again, like I'm not taking off my shirt, I'm going to think twice because, I'm 66 years old. I mean, this is the real me. And I actually, one thing that I thought was very well done in that movie, Something's Got to Give, with Jack Nicholson and Diane Keaton. And, and he's used to bedding these young babes, and she's 65 years old. And I mean, she's actually got kind of a banging bod. I wouldn't mind having that body myself. And, but, that kind of trepidation and insecurity, that to me is much more appealing and real than, reading a bunch of books about, where, both romantic interests are beautiful. I mean, very few of us are beautiful. And I think real sex scenes can be much, much more meaningful. And then we don't develop these, really strange notions about what the media is pushing, with the Kardashian kind of sexual allure, which I actually find these women to look bizarre, but that's just me. I don't find that, I don't find that attractive. And it doesn't surprise me that if this is the gold standard, that you have all these poor young women, teenagers with eating disorders, because how many people look like that? So I think I would read books that have sex scenes that you feel comfortable with between either hetero or gay couples. And really, I think with the gay couples, you have to be so careful not to fetishize them, because women writers can do that very easily.
Another one thing that you just brought up made me think about this in terms of writing about sex with an older couple,
Yeah.
past their 60s.
Yeah.
I mean, you're right about the movie with Jack Nicholson and Diane Keaton. I don't think I've ever seen a movie with basically mature adults being attractive to one another and having sex. It's not portrayed. But maybe I'm wondering if you know of books where perhaps it is. I can't think of anything.
Well, we're in such a youth culture. I don't know, I'd have to give it some thought.
Okay.
Yeah, I would watch this movie, Something's Got to Give, especially since Nicholson is portrayed, which of course he's basically playing himself. I mean, this is the man who was in his 60s and was bedding 20-year-olds. But it is about, and what I do like about this is that so they go to bed together, even though he thought he'd never want to go to bed with a woman this age, but it shows them laughing afterwards and walking and talking, and about how, sex is almost immaterial. And I'm not saying it is immaterial, but I'm saying that it's part of a whole package. And, I did think, I'm trying to think of a movie. There was a movie with Meryl Streep and Tommy Lee Jones where their marriage is falling apart, and they go to one of these sex weekends, where they're trying to restart their marriage because they're both fairly miserable. And it's about this older couple rediscovering themselves. And it has a sexual counseling component to it. I can't remember the name of it, but it was very, very sweet about how you just kind of get into these patterns, and how the sex isn't important, but it's important on the level in terms of emotional connection. Because, it's certainly my attitude towards sex is a lot different than when I was 20. And I think as you age, it does become about emotional connection and physical, obviously physical pleasure. I mean, that's part of the package. but it's a little bit different, I think.
There's a scene in one of the many remakes of Pride and Prejudice, and I can't remember which one it was, where Mr. Darcy is taking Elizabeth's hand as she gets out of a carriage.
Yes.
And,
yes.
there,
Yeah.
talk about repressed sex.
Yeah.
And he just looks at her, and as he walks away, the camera is just on his hand, and he kind of shakes it.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's in that little gesture, it says a lot, a lot. And I read an interview with him about that scene, and he said he just happened to do that. That wasn't in any script. He's just stretching out his hand or something, but they kept it and used it. And I just thought it was just a perfect way of he's hiding his feelings, and he's not going to come out with the love he feels for her, at least at this time. It's just not in his nature. Yeah.
Well, I really like that version, and since I keep bleeding about this, I'm a Jane Austen fanatic. I really like that version because it's with Matthew Macfadyen, and there's this scene where they're dancing in the ballroom, and Elizabeth already hates him because she thinks that he's destroyed Wickham's life, and they're having the dance. They're in this ballroom, and they have only eyes for each other. And it is incredibly sexual, even though she is sort of radiating this hate, but, in a very polite way. And then they have their big confrontation where he, proposes to her. It's in the rain. And he basically says, I'm still going to marry you, even though I think that, your family are a bunch of white trash. And they are fighting. I mean, they're screaming at each other, right? But they're getting closer and closer and closer. And you can feel the sexual tension between the two of them. And at one moment, you actually think that he is going to kiss her and that she is going to accept this kiss. I mean, it's probably the most sexually tense scene I've seen in a movie in years. And they don't touch, but there is just the two of them. I mean, they're fighting, he is furious with her. He's humiliated. She just absolutely despises him. And yet there's this sexual attraction between them. And it's very, very powerful. And
that's interesting, just how you describe it coming together, because you can not easily, but you could write that scene.
Oh, yeah.
And maintain that tension.
I mean, they're in the rain, they're both getting soaked. And, at one point, there's like 4 inches between them. That's it, 4 inches. And, they can probably feel the warmth of their breath on each other's faces because it looks cold. Of course, it's in England, so it looks real freezing. And it very, very powerful. And to me, that is the kind of scene you want to write. And, it is so much more powerful because it says so much about who these characters are and not what they're going to do. I mean, there's a zillion emotions in that scene. It's about 5 minutes long, a zillion emotions. And now if you wrote it where, they were making out on the bench or something, under this, I think there's a folly there or something, then no, it wouldn't mean as much as this. I mean, this is a very powerful scene. It's the apex of the movie. And so I just think that people should use sex to enhance their character and plot arcs. I mean, it's just right there. And it's so easy to use as opposed to, when we were talking earlier about titillation. I mean, right. Titillation, okay, fine. But, love, hate, history,
do you want to say anything? And I know I said I wouldn't ask this, but I'm going to anyway. Do you want to say anything where you've gotten all this writing experience from?
Well, yeah, I have kind of a secret writing life, and I've written a lot of sex scenes. And I found over the years that I wrote fewer and fewer sex scenes. because it did get boring. It didn't, and I tended to use toward the end of these, they were more like short stories or not so much novelettes. I tended to, the sex for me was usually something that happened at the end of the book, because it symbolized to me a meeting of I don't want to say this sounds so corny, a meeting of souls, where because when you do have sex with someone, and you can have anonymous sex. I mean, I'm not going to say that, I certainly wasn't a saint in college, but you can have that. But what does it mean? So for me, when someone has sex, it really means something important has happened in terms of a character's letting down of walls or forgiveness. I think forgiveness, sex is an act of forgiving someone can be very powerful. And so to me, it becomes much more important as a device to show where your characters are where they are, as opposed to titillate. I mean, people can be titillated by, and I'm not saying titillation is bad. It's just that as a writer, I'm not that interested in it, because I think you can create that tension in many other ways. I would far rather have my characters running through a field trying to get away from something. It's not necessarily titillating, but it's action. It's the potential for violence is much there than having them sit under a tree, having sex in a field. Because to me, that is, unless there's a reason for it. And that's my main point. You have to have a reason for it. What does it say about your character? And it can say so much about, and completely different things about your characters. One character can experience, gratitude, love, other experience, or betrayal. Like I pointed out, this is a betrayal. Once you have sex with someone, even if it's anonymous sex, there's a letting down of walls, usually. So.
Okay, well, I thank you. I'm looking, I don't see any other questions, but this was really interesting, and certainly for me.
I hope it gave you some ideas.
It does. And so far I've put more emphasis on the two of them, these two characters, before they go into the bedroom, and sort of the coming together, where she's had problems with commitment. And so with her beginning to say, okay, maybe it's time to connect with somebody again. Anyway, don't have to go.
No, but I'm just saying, that you can have her try to connect and not have it work.
Okay.
Where if she does have commitment problems and they get to a certain point where they think they're going to have some sort of sexual event and she can't do it, that might be much more powerful and says something about her character and her trauma, that this isn't solved just because you love someone. It's not, this doesn't solve things.
That's a great twist that I hadn't thought of. So,
yeah.
But I just want to thank you so much for spending some time with us and talking about it, because it just kind of opened my eyes a bit into what can go in, or what maybe it really doesn't need to go into a sex scene.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't.
Not at all. Yeah. No. And for us to let you know that we are going to have Facebook Saturday Live next month in November, and then we'll take a break until January. And next month, we're going to have our own Lori King with us. And she's going to she's going to talk about editing. So you've got your first draft done, set it aside for a bit, and now comes the really hard work, editing it. So information will be sent out about that in the next couple of weeks. But I thank you all for tuning in.
Thank you, Glenda. Appreciate it.
Claire, and we'll see you next month. Bye-bye.